Well, audience members know that comedy is an important part of Dave White Presents, and that I fancy myself as being a little bit creative in the humor department. So it is a real treat for me to bring on an expert in the field of comedy, not just a comedian and a comic writer, but an author. And that's what we're going to talk to him about today. He is named David Misch. And David, I want to welcome you to Dave White Presents.
My pleasure to be here.
David has worked in show business for 35 years. He has written or produced pilots for NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox. I better not go through the whole list here. HBO, Showtime, PBS. Was executive producer of Duckman on USA. In fact, he's taught musical satire at UCLA. I don't know how you ever found time to write this book.
Well,
David?
The main way I was able to find the time was to be 62 years old.
Yeah, that's a tough way to do it. The book we're talking about here, folks, is called Funny the Book. Everything you always wanted to know about comedy. And that's really a terrific description. I was impressed on here, David, some of the comments about the book you've got from people. Jason Alexander comments on it. But I noticed a former guest on Dave White Presents, Bill Marks, author of the book Son of Harpo Speaks. And he says about your book, Dad, referring to Harpo Marx, Dad would give Funny the Book 11 honks. Bravo. David Misch has now become the sixth Marx brother. And I won't read all of the flattering comments, but my favorite was from Weird Al Yankovic, who said to describe this book as the most entertaining and enlightening book that I haven't found the time to read yet. Now, folks, that gives you...
I think he was being completely sincere.
You think he what?
He was being completely sincere about that.
Yes, in his case, that's very true. Well, listen, we could spend the interview talking about, what others have thought of the book, including myself. This book just came out in June. I have read it myself. I loved it. We have a link up on the Persons of Interest page for audience members on how they can go and purchase it. I notice in here, David, you get 3 cents out of every copy, I think you said, that's sold. Folks, remember, a lot of the comments that get made here, this is a book on comedy. But it's not a joke book. There are some jokes in here, but this is not a joke book. So, David, it's your book. You describe it for folks.
Well, I'll talk about the joke thing first. There are some jokes in it. There's a chapter on jokes. And it really sort of gets to the core of what I was trying to do, which is it's an old saying that, if you try to describe comedy, you kill it. And I wanted to describe comedy and not allow it to lie bleeding in the gutter. I wanted it to come up and thrive even after I dissected it. I was going to stitch it back together. My belief is that it's easy to dissect comedy. It's easy to keep it alive when dissecting. You just tell the joke first. You don't tell the joke as you're dissecting it. So I tell jokes, and then I try and describe why they and how they get their effect. And I feel that when you do that with any art form, you get closer to it. I myself just love backstage stories about show business and how artists achieve their effects and everything. And I thought everyone loves comedy, but no one really respects it. No one accords it the same degree of authority that they do to some of the other art forms. And I thought it was about time to get serious about comedy. So anyway, this book goes through a whole bunch of things. The mythology of comedy, going back to an ancient character named Trickster, the history of comedy from the earliest recorded joke, which involves farting, to today's most cutting-edge contemporary humor, which involves farting. And to also discuss psychology and biology. There's a science section. You don't have to take the science section, but it's actually kind of fun. It turns out dopamine is the funniest chemical in our brains. And philosophy, and of course talking about the great comedians and comedies and how they did what they did.
All right, and there's kind of, how do I want to say, and a connection with an internet connection in this book as well that I thought was kind of original. Tell the audience about that.
Yeah, well, one thing it's tough to do is talk about great comedy and not be able to look at it. And although it still requires a tiny bit of work, I wanted to eliminate one step from your reading about someone in the book and saying, hey, I'd like to see something that person did, and having to go out and buy it. So I've included links in the book, which bring you to my website for the book, funnythebook.com. And if you go there, there's a whole page where all the links in the book have videos. So you can see Buster Keaton in action, and you can see Richard Pryor doing the routine I talk about. And I think it makes it a lot easier and more fun to actually experience what the book talks about.
Oh, very much so. Just another example of something that's very original. In fact, I'm going to alert the audience. We won't tell them what, but a couple of things. Folks, when you get your copy of this book, you don't have to start at the beginning. If you want to get kind of an idea that David might be a bit of a funny guy himself, I suggest you start with Chapter 14. Now, people, would you agree that they could go to Chapter 14, read Chapter 14, and then go back and start the book, and they'd have a pretty good idea of how this book is constructed.
I agree, and also Chapter 14 is a pretty easy read. It won't take a tremendous amount of time.
Okay, and I'm not going to say any more about it, but that was my favorite. Rather, the whole thing in simplicity, it certainly is. Because you talk about the different types of humor, what are some of the, if you want to say, types or styles of humor?
Oh, well, there's all sorts of genres of humor. Did you mean like the way I break down types of jokes particularly?
Not necessarily. I was kind of thinking like there's slapstick would be one kind, or so things that way.
Absolutely. Well, maybe you can sort of divide it into high comedy and low comedy, where you have fart jokes and people falling down, and on the one hand, and then jokes that require more intellectual engagement. And actually, that gets to what I divide all humor into I divide jokes into these two categories, but I think humor in general also works with it. One is, and it involves some big words, so don't freak out when I say it, but rapid juxtaposition of different concepts. That would be two different ideas that come together really quickly in your brain and make you laugh at the way they're so unlikely together. And an example I use is the old song, "Oh, Susanna." It rained all night the day I left. The weather, it was dry. The sun so hot I froze to death. Now, that may not be a knee slapper, but why do we like it at all? It's because it's silly. And why is it silly? It's putting two things together that don't belong together. And if you think about it, that really kind of describes a huge amount of comedy. Here's a joke. He's so ugly, when he was born, the doctor slapped his mother. So when you do that, you get this image in your head of the doctor slapping the mother. And that image, which is so ridiculous, is what makes you laugh. Here's another one. Woody Allen had a joke. I'm divorced. The problem was my wife was so immature, like she'd come in when I was taking a bath and sink all my boats. So immediately you get an image of Woody Allen in the bathtub and a woman coming in and messing with his boats, and, that's funny, too. And actually, here's a great Jerry Seinfeld joke. If aliens landed on Earth, they'd assume dogs are the leaders of the planet. Because if you see two life forms and one of them makes a poop and the other one carries it around for him, who would you assume is in charge? So,
listen, well, I brought up slapstick for a little earlier. You in here, explain where the term slapstick originates from.
Yeah, that's interesting. Most people, I love words, and I've been examining their origins since I was a kid, and it's fascinating that it's a literal object in commedia dell'arte, which was a medieval form of comedy in which actors outdoors would do very broad things that eventually turned into British Punch and Judy shows. They had a long stick a wooden board which they would use to hit the other person, and the other person would do a somersault, a tumble, as if they'd been hit and it hurt. And it actually was constructed so that it made a slapping sound, so you didn't actually have to hit the person very hard. And that was called the bataccio, which in Italian means the slapstick.
Yeah, there it is, folks. Now, there's important things here. I'm older than you are, David, and I didn't know where that originated from, but that's stuck with me from reading it. When it comes to, okay, there are various types or a lot of different types or styles of comedy. Are there certain elements that are common to all of these types? And if so, what are they?
Oh, absolutely. And this gets another of the core things in my book, which is the idea that comedy and drama are not dissimilar at all. The only difference between comedy and drama is in their effect. In one, you make a very, a staccato barking noise when you hear it. You laugh. You give an external representation of your internal feelings. Whereas in drama, you may look sad, you may even cry, but there isn't that definitive thing. And very often, if we're watching drama and someone took a photo of us, you wouldn't be able to tell that the person was emotionally engaged. Whereas in comedy, there's always a giveaway. So the key elements of comedy are actually not that different than drama, but they are basically surprise and tension and resolution. Anything comedic is something that surprises us. Anything comedic usually has some sort of build-up that resolves in a way we don't expect. And the traditional idea of the rule of three, which is that, you say, a blonde, a brunette, and a redhead go into the jungle, and then the blonde does something, the brunette does something, and then the redhead does something that's different. And that difference is what makes us laugh, but it only works because of the pattern that's been established by the first two. So that's where my chapter on science comes in, because pattern recognition is a neurological function, and it's the key to comedy.
Well, this is certainly, as folks should be catching on by now, is not a superficial study in comedy, and yet this is far, far from an academic book. It's a fun book. You mentioning, drama. George Burns always said that a comedian was, a dramatic actor was a comedian with bad material.
I didn't know that.
Is something that I have kind of made as a rule. You comment on this. For things to be funny, maybe this only applies to certain elements, but for things to be funny, there has to be some kind of a basis or a connection to truth or reality. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's the way we play with truth, the way comedy plays with truth, that gives it its power. And that, in a way, goes back to the first comedic figure, the thing that anthropologists call trickster, a figure that occurs in literature and through civilizations throughout history, going back to prehistory. And it's always a figure that plays with the way things are, the way things we expect them to be, so that a bum becomes rich, a man dresses like a woman, an adult acts like a kid. Whenever something is different than the reality we're used to, it catches our attention, and in comedy it makes us laugh.
All right, I'm going to ask this. Maybe I'm seeking, trying to make myself look good. When you limit your comedy to audio, where you can't see something, you can't see somebody falling down, you can't see somebody, getting hit with the slapstick or whatever, is that more difficult?
No, it's just a different form of it, though. I mean, then it's almost entirely language, although, it reminds me, it's not a direct example of this, but one of the, and very frequently, though, we paint pictures with words. So probably, many of your younger viewers may not be aware that in the 20s, 30s, 40s, the most popular form of entertainment in America, maybe even more popular than movies, was radio. Everyone gathered around their radios at night to listen to great dramatic and comedy shows. And one of the great comedians then was a guy named Jack Benny. And one of the ways he was funny was in having a persona, which he played jokes off of. And his persona was stingy. He was cheap and would, do anything. At one point, he loses $1 and he goes to the police station and they ask if he can describe it, and he says it's serial number because evidently he's memorized all his funny serial numbers. So the most famous joke in radio history was Benny is walking home at night and a robber comes up to him and says, "Your money or your life?" And Benny pauses and the audience sort of giggles and the robber says, "Listen, mister, give me your money or your life." And there's a long, long pause, and then Benny says, "I'm thinking it over."
Yeah.
And the point there is that, that's purely, verbal. You don't see anything, but your brain sees it. You can see as, him trying to decide whether it's worth giving up his money or not.
Well, you're right, and it's also, David, that it wouldn't be funny or as funny without the persona of Jack Benny the cheapskate delivering the line. Since we're talking about famous routines, you mentioned what you consider to be the greatest, I'll call it, comedy routine, and I certainly agree with you in here, and it was from Abbott and Costello. Talk about that a bit. Why do you think it's the greatest, and what made it so?
Well, I'll adjust that slightly. I'm not sure I think it's the greatest. I actually have another one I'll talk about if you want, but it's certainly probably the single most famous routine in comedy history. And it's fascinating, and I didn't get into it in the book, but it actually goes back to medieval times. But it's Abbott and Costello's Who's on First, which depends on the character that Lou Costello plays, not understanding that the name of the first baseman on this team that Abbott is the manager of is Who. So once he doesn't understand that, the routine just flows, and what's on second, I don't know, is playing third, and you can see it on my website, and also you can YouTube it. It's very fast talking, and this basic misunderstanding just ends up being so delightful because it's compounded with the other names and with Costello's frustration and not even being able to hold a conversation without being misunderstood. So that actually it goes back hundreds of years where, like in medieval times, there was a town in England called Ware, W-A-R-E, so the routine came out of that. Humans' interest in playing with words, which goes again back to Trickster. That was one of Trickster's main things, was making puns and confusing people by saying things in a funny way. That's one of the elements of comedy, but it's also one of the elements of humanity.
Well, that particular routine, I mean, I have both watched it and heard it, and you don't have to see them. There's not too much visual about it at all. But probably dozens of times, I can virtually recite a lot of it myself. I like it so much, and yet I still enjoy listening to it, and I still think it's funny, even when you know what's happening, what's coming. I wanted to talk about so that I don't run. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it was voted the greatest comedy routine of the 20th century, and it's probably the only comedy routine I've ever heard of that was copyrighted. Abbott and Costello copyrighted it.
I was not aware of that. Let me ask you, there's something that is in your resume that I want to bring up that ties in with this so that I don't leave it out and run out of time. You worked on, in some capacity, the Police Squad series, I believe, and that was produced or originated or whatever by the same people that did the Airplane movie. What I wanted to talk about those, they were just all of them. I loved all of them. I have them on DVD. I've watched them many, many times. There's a lot of funny stuff, but in particular is this. These were not movies that starred comedians. These had serious actors delivering these lines, and they were delivering the lines in a serious vein. Leslie Nielsen, Robert Stack, Lloyd Bridges, Peter Graves, George Kennedy, who was in more of these. In your opinion, does having the serious actors deliver these intensify the humor?
Oh, absolutely. That was key to the success of these movies and TV show. On the other hand, you got to remember that this is a very specific type of humor. This was humor that basically it came out of the guys who thought of it. Jerry Zucker, his brother David Zucker, and Jim Abrams, who did the movie Airplane. They were watching a movie called The Crowded Sky, and it was about an airplane and a captain, and there was food poisoning, all the things from the actual Airplane movie they just stole from The Crowded Sky. But they were watching the movie one night, and they were making fun of it, and they decided, why don't we make fun of it with another movie? So the whole idea to do a deadpan was to not be silly, to be silly only in the way it played off the situation. So they wanted dramatic actors to do it because comedy actors would give away the joke. And one of the challenges in doing the TV show that was based on that, it was called Police Squad and also starred Leslie Nielsen, one of the challenges was that when it was canceled, we shot 6 of them and only 4 got on the air. And when it was canceled, there was a rumor, I don't know if it's true, that an ABC executive said the problem with this series is you have to watch it. And what he was meaning was that, like my mother would watch TV while knitting. She would knit and she would glance up occasionally. If you did that with Police Squad, you would think it was a normal TV show. You would think it was a show about police officers. It's only by watching and seeing the ridiculous things that would sometimes go on around this deadpan language, that was the only way you got it. So you actually had to pay attention to it, and the feeling was that most people don't pay attention while watching TV. Frequently, they're doing other things.
Yeah, that's a shame because those were, I'm going to point out also, and especially in Airplane, for example, there was a lot of funny stuff going on that was removed from what I'll call the main thrust of it. And I'll give an example in the movie in Airplane. You're seeing some of the characters, talking, delivering dialogue, and in the background, here are terrorists with masks and hoods walking through the metal detector, carrying machine guns and grenade launchers and so on, and everyone's oblivious to this. And then finally, the security people grab this old woman with her walker and throw her down on the ground and start doing. But this is all in the background. There are things like this all throughout the movie that are, I'm going to call it, removed from the main action, if you want, that were just hilarious.
Yeah, I can't remember if it's in the book and therefore on the website or not, but in one of the episodes I did, I had a scene with exposition where the 2 lead characters were just setting up the plot, saying who they suspected of murdering a boxer and what their next step was going to be. There was no funny in that at all. So it was my challenge to figure out a way to make the scene funny while still getting that straight dialogue across so that the plot made sense, even if people didn't care. So what I did is they are in the room where the boxer has been killed, but to make it seem like he wasn't murdered, whoever did it made it look like a suicide. And as the 2 lead characters discuss what they're going to do about this, behind them you just see the legs of the boxer swinging back and forth as everyone just obliviously goes about their business. There's like 15 people in the room, and the legs swing back and forth with a lovely rope sound that the sound editor put in, and then occasionally hit a cop in the face, and things. But no one cares. They're just pushing these legs back and forth across the screen, and that's all you can watch. And that's great, because that way you don't have to watch the boring people talking.
Now, you mentioned in the book, too, one of the for me, funniest guys that ever lived and the funniest series of movies, and that was Peter Sellers and his Pink Panther series. And we don't have too much time to go into it, but I want you to comment on how the antics, how Sellers' antics with some of these things that happen to him are amplified by the fact of someone else just watching him, not saying anything, not doing anything. Discuss that a little bit, because you talk about it in the book.
Well, absolutely. That's one of the key ways and one of the subtle ways. This is one of the things I really think is interesting, and you can get into comedy in a way you wouldn't expect, that the way to draw a viewer in is not to telegraph that something is funny. Let the viewer work it out for him or herself. This is actually Steve Martin's credo. Is one reason he got into comedy is he thought, I will not telegraph that I am saying something funny. They're going to have to work it out for themselves. So what Peter Sellers, who was actually frequently a very subtle comedian himself, he did not, flail around all the time, and he got some of his funniest effects from being subtle. But sometimes when he was doing physical comedy, the director, if he was good, would cut to someone watching. The example I use, and it's on the Funny the Book website, is an actor named George Saunders in Shot in the Dark, where Sellers is attempting to put a pool cue back in its rack and is getting tangled up on it and falling down on the ground and having a horrible time. And you keep cutting back to George Sanders, and he's just staring. He doesn't stare with bemusement. He doesn't stare with, rolling his eyes, what an idiot. He just stares without any expression at all. And what this does is allow us it frees up our emotions. We're not being told, get it, get it, get it. We're being told something's going on here, and you have to laugh yourself. You have to put the comedy in. You have to engage with it to have the fun. And when an audience is pulled in, they're much more connected to the material. So all the great comedians did this to some degree. And, again, it's something that's used frequently in drama.
Yeah, and again, we see that in several of the Pink Panther movies where serious actors, George Sanders being one, and I know Robert Weber is another, we could go down the list, are in there delivering these straight lines, and just as we discussed in Airplane, makes it funny. I want to talk about one other program and get your take on it, because it is one that I have admired for, I guess it's going on for over a quarter of a century, and I think one of the funniest creations in history, and that is The Simpsons. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, The Simpsons is magnificent. The first thing that pops in my mind about The Simpsons, it's a subsidiary of Harvard University. Almost since its beginning, the vast majority of writers on The Simpsons came from Harvard and an institution there called the Harvard Lampoon. So these are very bright men and women writing that, and the smartness is disguised with stupidity, which is something I think many of the great comics did. Maybe my favorite group is Monty Python, and they would do a fart joke in one sentence and a reference to the philosopher Kierkegaard in the next sentence. And combining high and low is wonderful to engage people of all levels with the material. And The Simpsons, obviously kids love it and adults love it too. It's just plain smart. And it's smart in a way that's totally not condescending. It's just like, we're doing something funny here. If you get it, great. If you don't, there's another joke coming up in a minute.
Well, I agree, and how they can come up with fresh ideas. It's contemporary. It's contemporary situations, if you will, that we can identify with. Amazing imagination, and it plays to virtually every stereotype that you could possibly name. Listen, I want to, because we're out of time here, David, and that's a shame from my standpoint, because this is really fun to talk about. I want to remind people the book. It's called Funny the Book. We have a link up on the website. Some things that I had down here I was going to talk to David about, the pictures and the captions of the picture in your book. We don't have time to go into it, David, but yeah, I'm going to tell you, you sucked me in, because with the first two or three of them that I came across, I had made notes down here to tell you, hey, I found an error on this page, and hey, I found an error on this page. Yeah, and then finally it dawned on me, there's no error in here. This is just more of your funny stuff. We didn't even get into, really, folks, you're going to read about in here a discussion, examples on the Marx Brothers, on Woody Allen, on Steve Martin, Lenny Bruce, George Carlin, all the different types, if you will, of comedy, really broken down and describing here why it's funny in a way that I've never seen anyone else do. David, what else you got in the past? You were a writer on Mork and Mindy. What's going on now?
Well, as I may have mentioned earlier, I'm 62, so less is going on in that realm. I'm teaching, and I'm working on this book and some other ones, but I still have my hand in slightly. I'm working on a pilot right now for television that may or may not happen. But as one, it's sort of a young person's game, and I appear to be aging out of it, but holding on by my fingernails, clawing my way to stay in for a little while more because I love it. But yeah, I just love the field of comedy and in whatever place I can do it.
Well, I'll tell you, I am glad that you took the time to put together this terrific book, and I really hope that it's successful, not just because of the 3 cents a copy that you're going to accumulate on this, whatever, but because of all the enjoyment that people are going to get if they go out and invest a couple of shekels and do this. And I just can't encourage them strongly enough. Well, all right, David Misch, you've been on NBC, CBS, ABC, HBO, PBS, UPN. Now you've been on DWP. The resume is complete, and I want to thank you sincerely very, very much for coming on here and being a super interesting guest on Dave White Presents.